I was a freshman in high school in 2014 when I was approached by an online predator. He used the platform Facebook to first contact me and hid behind the account name called Closed Turn. I remember that night. I was at TGI Fridays having dinner with my family.
Than confronting the scourge of child sexual exploitation, or CSAM. You know, that's a anodyne-sounding abbreviation. But as I hope everybody in the room appreciates, and those who are listening online understand, that abbreviation stands in for a terrifying, horrifying reality. We're talking about, in a word, this first hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Crime and Counterterrorism to order. It is a privilege to serve as the chair of this subcommittee during this Congress, and I'm equally delighted to have as the ranking member my colleague, Senator Dick Durbin, who is on his way over from lunch. His staff tells me I can blame Senator Schumer. I said I blame Senator Schumer for so many things. But he will be joining us shortly. It's a delight to have Senator Durbin as the ranking member on this committee, and it's particularly a privilege to partner with him on this important topic that we're here to discuss today. Senator Durbin and I have worked together on a number of initiatives. I don't think any is more important than confronting the scourge of child sexual exploitation, or CSAM. You know, that's a anodyne-sounding abbreviation. But as I hope everybody in the room appreciates, and those who are listening online understand, that abbreviation stands in for a terrifying, horrifying reality. We're talking about, in a word, child pornography. We're talking about child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse. The amount of this material online, available online, is truly astounding, and we're going to talk about that over the course of today's hearing. But of course, these aren't just statistics. Every single instance of CSAM online represents a real child, a real person who has been tragically and oftentimes life-alteringly abused. And it's the conviction of myself, and I know Senator Durbin, and I hope every member of not just this subcommittee, but the entire Senate Judiciary Committee, that we have to do something about this. We've talked about it for years. The time to take definitive action is here, and that's why the legislative framework that we are discussing today, I think, is so incredibly important. But let me just give you a sense of the scope of the problem that we're talking about. Worldwide, 302 million children have been victims of child sexual abuse material and child sexual exploitation online. Let me say that again. Worldwide, 302 million children. 300 million children globally have been subjected to online solicitation. Solicitation, that is, for some sort of sexual abuse or following some sort of sexual abuse. To give you another angle on the scope of this problem, when an online platform becomes aware of instances of child sexual exploitation, under our law, they're required to report those instances to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, their cyber tip line, and we're delighted to have the CEO of NCMEC with us today. But just consider this data. In 2014, the number of reported instances of online child sexual exploitation in 2014 was 1.1 million. Now, that's a staggering number. But consider where it is today. In 2023, the year for which we have the most recent full data, that number was 36.2 million. 1.1 million in 2014, 36.2 million reports of online child sexual exploitation in 2023. And the number of urgent reports, those are cases where the child is thought to be at present risk. You might say clear and present danger. That number has grown by 140% in just the last 3 years. If you think about the images themselves, the poster behind me gives you some sense of this. Back in 2004, there were 450,000 images reported online of child sexual abuse material. Again, that number in itself is huge. Nothing like what we're seeing today. The number today tops 104 million known reported images of child sexual abuse online. This is truly a crisis. It is an epidemic. And it's not a theory. It affects far too many children in the United States of America, to say nothing of the, as we've seen, hundreds of millions of children worldwide. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? And that's what we're here to talk about today. Senator Durbin and I, in the last Congress, introduced what I believe is truly landmark legislation, which I might add passed the Senate Judiciary Committee in what is nothing short of a miracle by a unanimous vote. This legislation would protect child victims and witnesses in courts with new rights, new safeguards, new procedures. It would expand the scope of restitution provisions in current law. It would enhance the cyber tip line. It would create a child online protection board to allow parents and victims to go and argue their case, to have material taken down, and to receive restitution. And for my money, maybe most importantly, it would allow victims, finally, to have their day in court. It would allow victims to get into court and to bring suit against online platforms that are hosting this material and making money on it. Which brings me to the culpability of big tech. You know, big tech has said for years, oh, we're doing all we can, but we know because we've heard the testimony from folks who have sat right where our distinguished witnesses are sitting today. We've heard the testimony of parents who have gone to the big tech companies, have reported instances of child sexual abuse material online, including victims who reported their own abuse material. I was abused. These are my images online. Please take them down. The big tech companies often will fob them off on some complicated procedure that never bears any fruit or just flat out refuse to do anything. And I'll never forget the testimony of one mother who sat right there at that table and said, when I told this tech company, it was Snapchat in that instance, when I told them about the sexual abuse material that was online, they just laughed at me and said, there's nothing that you can do. You can't sue us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to change that. It is time to allow victims to have their day in court. One of the most important foundational rights that we have as Americans is the right to get into court, to get in front of a jury, and to vindicate the personal rights given to us by our Constitution, by our systems of law, by our system of laws, and dare I say, by nature and nature's God. And that right is currently denied to parents and victims in this country. You can't sue these platforms. They're protected by congressional legislation. It's time to change that. This bill would finally allow victims to have their day in court. And guess what? The big tech companies absolutely hate it. They despise it, which is how you know it's a good idea. In fact, it's how you know it's essential. Listen, I will never forget watching the FTC some years ago fine Facebook at the time. I think it was $1 billion. Maybe it was even more than that. What happened to Facebook's stock price the next day? It went up. They didn't care. Did they change their behavior? No. Did they do anything different? No. They just plowed straight ahead. But you know what these tech companies fear? They fear accountability before a jury of their peers. They fear a courtroom. They don't want to be accountable in court. They don't want victims. They don't want parents to have the right to sue them in an open court. They don't want to be held liable civilly, fairly. They don't want to be subject to due process. It is time to make them subject. It is time to impose civil liability. It's time to give victims this right. And that is what this bill would do, among the other important procedural safeguards and reforms that I mentioned just a moment ago. I want to thank everybody who's here in attendance. We have so many folks here from child protection organizations, so many of you who work in this field, who are literally in the trenches every day protecting children. Thank you for your incredible work, and thank you to our incredible witnesses who have joined us today. It's truly an all-star panel. And now let me introduce the witnesses. When Senator Durbin gets here, when the witnesses are finished, we'll allow him to make a statement. But let me introduce our witnesses, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear from each of them. We have Michelle DeLon, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She previously served 8 years as NCMEC's Chief Operating Officer. We're delighted to have you, Ms. DeLon. We've got John Tanago, who is the Executive Director of the International Justice Mission's Center to End Online Sexual Exploitation of Children. The center protects children in the Philippines, where nearly 500,000 children are sexually abused in order to produce this online CSAM material. This happens especially through live streaming, and I think Mr. Tanago will testify to that effect today. We have Gregory Schiller, who is the CEO of the Child Rescue Coalition. This is a nonprofit organization that rescues children from sexual abuse by building technology for law enforcement to identify and arrest and prosecute child predators. Thank you, Mr. Schiller, for being here. Taylor Sines, who is a survivor advocate. We're so glad to have you, Taylor. Specifically, Taylor is a survivor of internet-facilitated online enticement, child sexual exploitation, and CSAM. Her case was one of the largest online enticement, sextortion cases prosecuted at the time, with over 300 victims. 300 victims of the convicted perpetrator. And we have John Pizarro, who is the CEO and co-founder of Raven, a firm that focuses on legislative and policy solutions for child trafficking and child exploitation. Previously, John spent 25 years in the New Jersey State Police conducting, managing, and leading investigations in terrorism and organized crime, narcotics trafficking, and child exploitation. He spent his last 6 years as the Internet Crimes Against Children Commander. Now it's the custom of this committee and subcommittee to swear in our witnesses when they appear. So if I could ask each of you to rise and to raise your right hand, and then we'll get started. Mr. Schiller, thank you. Ms. Sines.
Thank you, Chairman Hawley and Ranking Member Durbin, and all of the other senators on this subcommittee. I am in front of you today during a time that will go down as a pivotal moment in fighting to protect our youth online. I was a freshman in high school in 2014 when I was approached by an online predator. He used the platform Facebook to first contact me and hid behind the account name called Closed Turn. I remember that night. I was at TGI Fridays having dinner with my family. On the car ride home is when I opened the messages. He had stated that I had to get in contact with him. He immediately said that it was very important. At first, I ignored the messages, but he would only send more. I replied to the message asking who this was, and they responded back saying, "I have something against you. You don't want anyone to see this." He had stated that he could not tell me what it was or who he had gotten it from. He told me that I couldn't tell anyone. He tricked me, making me believe that he already had compromising photos of me. In my teenage brain, I panicked and I thought I had no other choice but to comply with his orders. So I did what I was told, and this began the torment that I endured. Despite his warnings not to tell anyone, I immediately disclosed to my school resource officer as soon as I got to school. He told me that there was nothing that he could do for me, and to just ignore it and it would go away. He said that he couldn't help me in any way, even making me feel ashamed. He had no resources. He said he knew no one. After that, I thought there was nothing that anyone could do, especially because my school resource officer was a deputy for my local sheriff's department. If he's telling me that there is no one there to help, then it has to be true. After suffering for 2 years, I finally decided to take my voice back and share that I was being abused. The offender made good on his promises and took to Facebook to exploit me. He rapidly posted the hundreds of images and videos of me, making public pages and user accounts for more leverage. They were posted for the world to see. At that point, my family and I knew that we had to get law enforcement involved. We called 911, we explained what was happening as my offender continued to post online. When an officer got to my house, we explained the situation, and I remember him looking at me and saying, "Look, I'm just a road deputy. I don't know much about this stuff." At this point, I had lost any hope that there was help. I had lost all hope that anyone even believed me. After a moment, he looked at me and he said, "But I do know someone who may be able to help." Not much long after the phone call, there was a knock at my door. A detective who worked cybersecurity for the same department my school resource officer was from. As the detective and I sat in my kitchen and I shared my experience with him, he was on the phone with personnel from Facebook attempting to get the content removed. We were told that the profiles, public pages, and content would not be taken down as it did not violate their guidelines that most companies still do not have in place. That was April of 2016. It took time, and as we built connections within these platforms, we were able to get the content down within a few hours of the original postings versus it taking a day or maybe a little bit longer to be taken off the platform. You have to understand every minute, every second is filled with fear and anxiety for these victims. I consider myself lucky that in the end, I found a law enforcement agent who listened to me and who believed me. Lucky that my local state attorney offered a helping hand, and together they set me up immediately with a trauma therapist. Lucky that they didn't give up, and it's because of their hard work that I get to sit in front of you today. I have connected with other survivors throughout the years, and I can tell you that my experience is rare. Not every victim has the same positive outcomes that I did. It took time from when I disclosed in April of 2016 to get to sentencing for my offender. He was eventually tracked down as he masked his IP address and arrested August 3rd of 2017. From 2017 to 2021 was a back and forth of whether or not there would be a trial, or maybe we would get lucky and he would plead guilty. Finally, he pled guilty March 12th, 2021. 4 years ago from tomorrow is the day that he was sentenced to 75 years in federal prison with no chance of parole. At the time of his sentencing, he had 375 other victims. The unique, unconsidered aspect of this crime is that we are trafficked right from our homes, right from our schools, from our communities. Anywhere that our cell phone goes with us, we can be trafficked. For these children, it feels that there is no escape and no end. While I no longer have content circulating the public web or any public platforms, my images could continue to be traded on the dark web. And what happens if they're ever publicly posted again? The Stop CSIM Act that is currently being considered will help ensure the safety of our children online and hold big tech accountable in reporting and protecting them while they use their platforms. The victim protections outlined in this bill will help others have a more positive experience with the criminal justice system overall. This bill could help give victims and survivors the opportunity to take back their lives and protect them from further victimization. Throughout my experience, I learned that this happened to me, not because of me, and it does not define me. Please help us continue the fight to protect our children online. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Sines, for that powerful testimony. Thanks for your courage in sharing it.